Hello everyone, I'm RV Micah and welcome to the show where I'm still workshopping my catchphrase. Last time on the Tetrispective. The original is a clunky relic, the Nintendo version is overrated, the Sega version never made it out of Japan, a detail I left out last time, my bad. I was completely baffled by Tetris Pro, and my cat is plotting his revenge. Now, last time I closed off by saying that we'd be taking a look at the Super Nintendo versions of the game next, but truth be told, there's a couple more games from the NES and PC eras of the game that I wanted to talk about beforehand. So without further ado, let's continue our deep dive into the king of puzzle games. Welcome back to the Tetrispective.
I work so hard in arranging the blocks, but the landlord and taxman bleed me dry. But the workers will rise, we will not compromise, for we know...
Let's warm up a bit with another DOS game, Tetris Classic by Spectrum Holobyte. Now the reason I chose this particular version of Tetris to talk about instead of some other version is because it gives me a bit of a springboard to talk about one of the more interesting aspects of the history of Tetris. The overwhelming Russianness of it all. You've probably noticed that a lot of Tetris variants, Western ones in particular, have a very heavy Russian aesthetic to them. Well, this isn't just because the game was made in Russia. You see, back when it was first released in the US, puzzle games were still really niche, so they had no idea how to market the darn thing. But then someone had an idea. See, the Cold War was still going on by this point, and this was the first game exported from the USSR, so why not use that to their advantage? So, they added a lot of Russian imagery to the game and marketed it as some sort of exotic curiosity from beyond the Iron Curtain. And you know what? This approach actually worked! I love looking at this old marketing because it really plays into the rivalry between the US and the USSR. It gave the game the tagline, the Soviet Mind Game, and I especially love this one particular ad. The setting, Moscow. The mission, to confound the American public. The scheme, to create an addiction so strong we can't resist. The motive, to determine the ultimate winner, once and for all. My fellow Americans, it falls upon us, all of us, to answer the challenge that the Soviets have issued upon us. We can't let those filthy communists outsmart us by being better at a puzzle game than we are. It is our God-given duty to uphold the honor and values of this great nation by stacking blocks into holes better than the Russians can. Reagan's counting on us. America's counting on us. It falls to us to maintain the cause of freedom, capitalism, and making money off of your political adversaries around the world. Because there's nothing more American than profiting off of communist labor by appealing to political tensions. I just find it kind of funny how the game was advertised like it was a Soviet ploy to infiltrate the minds of America. How successful was this ploy exactly? Well, considering that there is a known scientific phenomenon called the Tetris effect, wherein people see blocks falling and other such things in real life well after they stop playing, yeah, I'd say it was a success. However, the Berlin Wall had long since been torn down by this point, so the flavor is much more traditional Russian. You've got these really cool detailed backgrounds, almost looking like Renaissance paintings, and they tell the Russian epic poem of Ruslan and Ludmila, I think I'm pronouncing that right, all set to renditions of the music from the opera of that story. The overall aesthetic of this game is really, really cool. Definitely give this one a try if you want to take a crack at plain old everyday no bells or whistles Tetris. Up next, we've got a version of Tetris for, of all things, the Philips CDI. Now, on first glance, this version probably isn't the best. The playing field is weirdly off-center and keeps changing locations for no reason, and since this is the CDI, you have to contend with an awful controller. But you know what? I've played Tetris with an actual TV remote, so this isn't too much of an issue, really. But the weird thing is, this version of Tetris is actually really relaxing and cool. I'd even go so far as to call it meditative. That's thanks to its combination of the minimal and non-distracting UI, the really pretty nature backgrounds, some of which are even animated, the lack of any actual sound effects, and the absolutely gorgeous music. Really want to recommend this game, but there's a problem. It's for the Philips CDI. You know, the CDI, one of the worst video game systems ever made. I would not recommend buying a CDI just to play this version of Tetris, not unless you really want to get, I don't know, the Flowers of Robert Mapplethorpe or something. I mean, if you already have a CDI, I guess I could recommend this, but if you do have one, you're probably a gaming YouTuber who owns one ironically just so you can play those awful Zelda games for your channel or something. So it's just kind of a sad situation where it's a good game on an awful console. Let's check back in on the NES and see what else they got in store for us besides the original games. This game is called Tetris 2. It's honestly super weird to see a numbered sequel to Tetris of all things. So here's the way the game works. You have a set of blocks you're supposed to clear by connecting them to 3 blocks of the same color, which drop from the top of the screen. When a block disappears, the ones above it are affected by gravity, and you can rack up combos up and this is just a reskinned version of Dr. Mario. Like, seriously, this game plays identically to Dr. Mario, another game about matching dropped objects to items of the same color and getting combos. Weirdly enough, the Super Nintendo did in fact have a 2-in-1 game with Tetris and Dr. Mario on the same cartridge. And Dr. Mario is a pretty good game on its own right, so if you have a Super NES, there are certainly worse games you could get. Believe it or not, there actually is a real Tetris 2 for the system, but for some reason it was Japan exclusive. The full title of this one is Tetris 2 plus Bombless. As the title implies, it contains both a version of Tetris and another puzzle game called Bombless, which we'll also talk about. Let's start with Tetris 2. Right off the bat, it loses points for not having the same Russian flair and... Oh my gosh, the gameplay is so freaking smooth! Okay, in the original games, the block moved down 1 square at a time, but this one, the movement is all so fluid. The controls feel a lot less ratchety, for lack of a better word, and I feel like I have more control over the blocks. It just feels so good to play. Also, you have a couple of other game modes that change the rules a bit. That's also pretty fun. But then we have Bombless. Here's the way the game works. It's somewhat different from Tetris, but also sort of similar. You still have to clear lines, but filling out a row doesn't make them disappear automatically. The only way to get rid of blocks in this game is to detonate these bomb blocks, which go off if you complete the row they're in. Usually they only take out the 3 or so blocks to the left or right of them, but if you complete multiple lines at once, the explosions are much bigger. Plus, if you have a square of 4 bomb blocks, you get a super bomb that destroys a lot of the blocks around them. You also have pre-made block formations to solve as opposed to an endless gauntlet of raining blocks. It's really satisfying to figure out the solution to the puzzle mode and see the chain reactions go off. It's pretty decent as far as puzzle games go. And then, in 1992, it was upgraded and released for the Super NES. Ah, the Super Nintendo. Easily my favorite video game console of all time, with such classics as Final Fantasy VI, Super Mario World, Donkey Kong Country, Final Fantasy VI, Link to the Past, F-Zero, Final Fantasy VI, Super Metroid, Earthbound, Final Fantasy VI, and, of course, Final Fantasy VI, just to name a few. So let's see what we got in terms of Tetris for this bad boy. Like I said, Super Tetris 2 is more or less the same as the NES version, just with better graphics and a different soundtrack. The one cool thing I found by accident while I was recording is that you can change the music simply by pressing select when the game's paused, so that's pretty nifty. Again though, it was Japan exclusive as far as I can tell, and I have no freaking idea why. This game here, Tetris Attack, was released in the US, but it isn't Tetris. It's just a graphical overhaul of the game paneled upon. Sort of like how Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine was just a reskinned Puyo Puyo, or Tetris 2 was a reskinned Dr. Mario. So what else is there in the way of actual Tetris games for the Super Nintendo? Well, as far as we Americans got, nothing. And for the life of me, I have no friggin' idea why, although I imagine it had something to do with the absolutely nightmarish licensing. But as far as Japanese versions go, we got a couple more to go. Also produced by Bulletproof Software, we've got Super Tetris 3. Now, this is basically a direct sequel to Super Tetris 2 in terms of its modes and mechanics, and to tell you the truth, this right here is a top contender for my favorite version of Tetris. It's got that cool Russian aesthetic that I love so much, the same silky smooth gameplay as Tetris 2, the sound design, sweet Arceus, the sound design! Now, I'm not talking about the music here specifically, although this game's soundtrack does, in fact, slap. But I also mean I love the sounds the blocks make. They have a legitimate weight to them that makes it so satisfying when they land. Just listen. Bravo. That is peak Super Nintendo right there. But we got 2 more modes to go here. First up is Sparkless, or as I like to call it, Bombless 2. This time, it's a Castlevania spin-off.
Yeah, between the overall gothic fantasy aesthetic, the monsters and such on the sides of the screen, those hot succubi that show up every so often, and the absolutely rockin' soundtrack. You can tell someone on the development staff really liked Castlevania. The main difference in gameplay between this and Bombless is the function of the bombs, or spark blocks, or whatever they're called. They function more like the bombs in the game Bomberman, where the explosions go up and down along with left and right. The downside is that the explosions no longer get bigger if you clear multiple lines at once, making you much more reliant on those super bombs and using explosions to set off other bombs. Just like Bombless though, this one's pretty good. The third game mode, Magicless, has a lot of great ideas. Too many if I'm being honest. In this mode, the color of the blocks are completely independent of their shape. If you clear a line with only one color, all blocks of that color disappear. Sounds simple enough, right? Well, then there are the gray blocks. If you clear a line with them, the gray blocks don't disappear. They stick around, which means you can actually pull off some pretty interesting combos with them. If you do the aforementioned thing by clearing a line with all one color, all gray blocks on the screen become that color. Like I said, a lot of these ideas are pretty interesting, but I feel like there are so many new mechanics that I'm still not sure what the overall goal is. It doesn't exactly help that you can freely change a block's color by rotating it enough times, basically cheesing the main mechanic of the game. Still, it's worth a couple plays, I think. Overall, Super Tetris 3 is one version I have absolutely no trouble whatsoever recommending. But Bulletproof Software made one last Tetris game for the Super Nintendo. The Japan-exclusive Tetris Battle Gaiden. You know how some puzzle games, like Puyo Puyo for example, are always versus matches between characters? Battle Gaiden is that sort of thing. Every round is a battle between either two players or one player against the computer, and there's a lot of characters to choose from. I'm only in my first year of taking Japanese class, so I can't read any of this, but it looks like we got a choice between Pumpkinhead, Wigglytuff, the bizarre love child of Mumbo Jumbo and Aku Aku, Aladdin, pink-haired Moe Girl, the Seven Dwarves after Doc and Happy died of cholera. This is Chrono, from Triggers, and that wolf guy you'd see in those early episodes of Dragon Ball. Good thing we got some backstory here. Of course, I can't read most of it, but from what I can gather, we're trying to stop a giant dragon from conquering/destroying the sovereign nation of Sand. And here we get to choose our opponent, and oh, would you look at that, we can actually read the names of these guys now. Looks like we're stuck with some pretty generic names like Ninja, Princess, and Halloween? Yeah, I guess we're fighting the entire holiday, not just the King of Halloween or something. Wait, that was just Aladdin? Neat. Now onto the gameplay itself. Like most Tetris battle modes, whenever you clear a line, garbage blocks get sent to your opponent to clutter their playing field. However, there are a few unique mechanics to note here. First of all, notice how you and your opponent both share the same next piece preview? That means that whoever drops their current piece first gets the next piece in line, leading to a lot of strategy when it comes to timing your drops. Second, those little yellow ball things. Whenever you clear a line with one of those, it fills up a special gauge on the side of your board. This allows you to use special moves which actually differ from character to character. That's actually really cool. These abilities have all sorts of effects, from helping you recover, to tripping your opponent up, to doing whatever the crap this is. Every battle is interesting and unique because of this, but it also means they last a freaking eternity, especially since you're playing 2 out of 3. And as you can plainly see, I kinda suck at it. But I'm not saying it's a bad game, not in the slightest. It's just too darn unique and unusual for the series to not recommend. Really quite a shame it never left Japan.
That's all we got for this round of Tetris. Join me next time as I talk about the games that made the leap to the Nintendo 64 and the PlayStation, as well as some of the more interesting arcade versions we got around that time. Later!
I am the man who arranges the blocks that descend upon me from up above. They come down and I spin them around till they fit in the ground like hand in glove. Sometimes it seems that to move blocks is fine and the lines will be formed as they fall. Then I see that I have misjudged it. I should not have nudged it after all.